you so that this session can be uploaded on our website. It takes a couple of days after our training session is over to see it on the website, but up on your screen, you should actually see the Learning Center, the University Center website that we usually hand out to everybody when they're looking for videos on how to do things in the software. And I'm just going to scroll down on my screen to show you the section that you will see all those appear in. So this little section here on the right-hand side, hopefully you can see my mouse under Continued Education. That's where all of our webinars are recorded, and then they get uploaded in that section. And you can feel free to pass that out to anyone you like, staff member wise, if you're hiring somebody new, if you're curious as to how we do something in the system or you want to watch a whole training session, that's exactly what those are. Those are all about 1 hour videos. So let's get started. Okay, so in today's session, like I mentioned, we're going to try to treat it like it's a little bit of a new thing to bill in the software, where we're hopefully dealing with people who maybe have tried it before, maybe you're kind of in the middle of it, but maybe there's also some new features that you can learn from today's session. But it's really an intro as to how we kind of go about it. So we are presuming, anyone watching this session with me, that you've already learned the steps up to the point that you're probably going to need to bill something. And by billing something, I mean that as invoicing. And that invoicing could be sending a paper invoice, an electronic file or something that has to go to a clearinghouse. Billing in our system is synonymous with invoicing. That kind of means the same thing. So what I mean by that is that up to this point, you've probably already been comfortable with or learned how to set up a patient, how to connect that patient with their insurance company. And I'm just showing you a fake patient on the screen and showing you the billing rules tab. So we've connected this particular patient to Medicare. That connection, I'm saying in my scenario here that there's a restriction. And my restriction is a certain number of visits, a certain expiry date. We're going to lose that kind of coverage. And that's tracking for me at the top of the screen. I have filled out their profile, hopefully with things like names and addresses and phone numbers and birth dates and policy and claim information as well. So we assume you've already done this part. And then the next step, session number 2, is usually all about the scheduler. And that's usually what's happening at the front desk. We're booking appointments. Maybe we're handling co-pays. Maybe we're taking money, giving invoices and receipts to patients for those co-pays. And then the third training section is documentation. We usually have a therapist come along, fill out some kind of document, a SOAP note, an eval, a reval, something. And in that document, they're usually using this little white hand icon, the treatment and service entry icon, to record services rendered for that patient. And because of the billing rule that we've set up on that patient, the services are going to be either going to insurance or directly to the patient, or maybe it's a split. Maybe a little bit of it is going to insurance and some of it is going to the patient. So that's the part we think that you've already done to date by the time you get to bill all this. Now, one other thing that we assume that you're doing is a daily balance as well. So I'm just going to use today here as an example in my scheduler. If I was balancing my day, I would be looking at all the appointments on my scheduler, and I would be looking for attendance. Did everybody show up? Did they cancel? Did they no-show? Especially for the people who are showing up, arriving or completing for their appointments, we would also want to make sure we probably have the little white hand on the appointment. And visually, what that means is we have entered some services, some treatments, some assessments for that patient. So I'm just going to scoot over here to the next day on the 25th. So this patient here in pink, that hopefully would stand out to us visually. And we would point out, oh, what happened on that patient? Did they actually show up for their appointment? Where's their hand? Where's their note symbol to say that the note is actually complete? So we also assume that check has also been completed. If doing the double check is new for you, then let's have a really quick look at some of the reports that would help us. So visually, the check for sure comes first. And then the next thing that you would do from there is you would run 2 reports available up under the report section and then under operations. You can can run it every day, every third day, every fifth day, that's fine too. But these reports, we suggest you run them every day. When you think your day is over, this is really a good way to double check things. And the first report is called the Daily Reconciliation. And the name of when we want you to run this report is kind of the title of the report. Although we give you a date range here, feel free to run this thing every third day, every fourth day, but we want to encourage that you probably run this thing every day. And that report is actually 5 or 6 of our reports all summarizing into one. And it's to help you kind of balance at a glance. So just quickly highlight some of the things you're looking for. The first section here, that's your revenue report, and that's showing you all the little white hand entries. That's usually all your treatments, your CPT codes, assessments, anything you're really charging for. And it's showing you, it's counting basically all of them. You did 24 of those with 5 units of this, and this is how much you charged for it. And at the end of the day, this is your total. And why that total is interesting, or why you should be looking towards that total, is because this total, especially the visit count in that total, and I apologize, I've drawn all over your screen here. So let me highlight just that little area there. So that visit count, in theory, should match the number of people attending in the scheduler, right? So this next little summary is all about the number of appointments that you've had in the schedule. And that's checking all the appointments to see how many people arrived, canceled, no-showed, showed up. So the number of people arriving should equal the number of visits you've charged for, potentially. And then also, you should be looking at the pending count, right? That's the symbol for attendance. That means, I don't know if the patient showed up. And in theory, if our day is over, we should never have anybody where we don't know if they showed up, right? Everybody should be a cancel, a no-show, an arrived, a complete, something other than pending. Okay. And then other interesting things on this report, again, are billing reconciliation. These are all the people who showed up that had a balance that didn't pay. Are you sure you're okay with that? These are all the people that I think you're missing something. I think they had an appointment, but you don't seem to have any hands. That's what you're checking for. That's kind of, whoops, I missed them. That's probably people in the scheduler who had an appointment, who did say that we arrived or completed them, but they don't seem to have any treatments or any services. So it's confused by that. And then the next part of this report is something new that's offered in a very newer version. I think it's only been around for about a month or so, and it's called a time discrepancy check. And what that's checking for is the amount of time that the appointment was scheduled versus the amount of time you're entering for billing. And then if there's a discrepancy, it points that out for you. So not all clinics really have to worry about that. If you don't really care about the time you're booking the appointment as opposed to what you're billing, then of course I wouldn't ask for that option when you run this report, but it is an option, and I'll just kind of point that out. When you're running the report, it's this little tick box here, enable time checking. Okay, so we assume that you've already run that report, discovered if you've missed anyone, figured it out, gone back and entered what you should have entered for that patient, kind of thing. And then the next report that you run is called the revenue report. And the revenue report is important, and you run that usually for the same time range that you just ran the daily report for. And I personally like to hit this little box in the middle that says show the injury related information as well. And what you're looking for here in this report, this is just the little white hands. This is now the entry saying, okay, you've entered white hands on everyone. That's the daily report. Now look at the white hands that you've entered. And this, 98% of this is probably something you're going to end up billing at some point. So what you're doing is you're checking the entries. You're just looking for mistakes. Does everything look right? So the division of your patient might help you. In my example here, this patient is a cash pay patient. So technically on the left, I probably shouldn't see things like copays and CPT codes. But if this patient is a Blue Cross patient, or maybe this patient down here is, a Medicare patient, I might say, okay, for Blue Cross, I know that I need GP modifiers on everything, or I need diagnostic codes and this, that, and the other thing. So that's something you're going to be looking for on this report. You're going to make sure you have a GP on all your codes you need it, and make sure you have a diagnostic code. Okay. Then typically you're looking for entries like time versus units of a code. If that were to say 60 minutes in time and only 3 units of this code, you may say, well, that calculation doesn't seem right. Maybe we should go back and edit that. Okay, so a lot of this process that you do every day, especially this report and identifying things and going back to the patient and fixing those things, that's what leads you to have very quick and easy billing. You've double checked it all, everything is kind of ready to go. Okay, so that's the part we think you've learned up until this point. And if that's not the case, we certainly can direct you to some extra little videos, or you can watch some of the previous webinars as well. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pick up from that point, and we're going to say, all right, we've double checked everything for the past couple of days. All the charges look good. I'm happy with my entries. I think I'm happy with my entries. So let's talk about billing it. So the kind of billing I like to focus on today, I start with the word payers on the left-hand side, and that's because I usually want to bill my third parties first, and then I bill my patients second, probably. And by third parties, technically that could be anything. It could be insurance, school districts, it could be employers, lawyers, all those things can be a payer to a client. 90% of what we do is probably insurance. So when you're setting up a payer, I'm just going to pick on this payer that's on the screen. I'm going to double click on their name. When you're setting up a payer, this is probably the most important part of the setup that really tells our system how this payer should act, how it should function, what we should look for. And the kind of payer really determines that. We're going to look for things, in this case, that a commercial type payer would need. That would change if we said this was a Medicare Part B payer. They would change if we said it was a motor vehicle payer or a workers' comp payer. So that's really important to identify the kind. And then these two selections here is what kind of invoice, what's the style of the invoice that we want to send if we're sending this as a primary insurance billing. If this is somebody's primary insurance and we're billing it, what should that invoice look like? And then this question is, what should it look like if it's a secondary billing? And typically your options are going to be paper or electronic at first. And let's have a look at those in the drop down here. So the paper option is the actual HCFA claim form. And in our system, there's two options. There's a 2014 version and a legacy version. 2014 is the latest version of the HCFA 1500 red form that's out there. So if you're looking for paper HCFA claim forms on your end that you would fill your printer with HCFAs and you want it to print out on the HCFA, that would be the option for well. Maybe it's going to a clearinghouse. Maybe you have a relationship with your insurance company that you're sending it directly to them. The two most popular names actually an EDI 837 5010, also known as an ANSI file. That's probably the most popular. The other type of file is called a HCFA e-bill 2014. And that is the HCFA claim form. It's just electronic. So when you look at that type of file, it can have many patients, many dates of service, but it sort of looks like the HCFA claim form. There's no boxes, but everything would be in the spot where the box would be. Okay, so each of those choices does technically have a little bit of different setup that you have to abide by, again, based on that choice. So paper options, they're going to need things like addresses and phone numbers for that payer. Your electronic options are going to be a little different. If we selected HCFA electronically as the primary style here, then we're going to need an identifier number for that payer here. And that's usually a 5-digit, 5-character identifier number, usually referenced or supported by your clearinghouse. You can easily look those up and get your 5-digit number. And that would go here in that spot if you were trying to send a HCFA e-bill. If you're trying to send an EDI type of file, then the identifier number is actually in a different spot. It needs actually a little bit more setup. And that's when you involve the settings drop down at the top of the screen. So there's very specific settings that you can edit or change for HCFAs. And then there's very specific settings that are required or you can change for EDI files, also known as 5010, also known as ANSI. And the EDI type of file, usually needs two kind of major things. There's about 100 different things that could come out in billing, but the two major things that they usually need is this one here, your clearinghouse information, the name of your clearinghouse or the name of whoever you're sending this to, and then they usually need 3 sender numbers and 3 receiver numbers. And those are numbers you can contact with the clearinghouse and figure out what those numbers are. A lot of times it's an account number or some kind of NPI number that references your clinic. But on the file, it has to contain these 6 numbers. Okay, the other thing that an EDI file needs is the payer tab to be complete. It actually needs the payer identifier number here. This is the 5-character, 5-digit payer identifier number. So I really just want to point out, you're entering the number here in the settings area if it's EDI, but you're entering the number here if you're sending a HCFA claim form or a HCFA electronic file. Okay. Okay, so that's all the setup technically that's needed at first to get started. So when you go to your list of payers, that is typically how you're going to bill your payers. Usually you're going to say something like, I want to bill all the payers that are going to my clearinghouse now at the same time, or I want to bill all my payers that are going on paper now together. At yourself on the list by clicking on the left-hand side until you get a little red flag. So you can always identify yourself or pick and choose off the list who you would like to work with. Another way to do that, especially if you have many payers that are on your list, you could use the 2 red flag icon on your function bar. And that 2 red flag is actually a search by criteria. You can tell the system to help you flag. Find for me, please, all my Medicare type of insurances. Find for me, please, all my insurance companies where I'm billing to my clearinghouse of Office Ally. Find for me, please, all my payers where I'm billing a 5010 file. I want to do that type of file all at the same time. So that's another way to go about it. I just have a few fake payers on here, so I'll just, for today's purpose, actually, I'll go to Medicare. So the first step is always flagging something, identifying something. And in our system, this is very consistent. After you flag something, it's always picking a function off the function part, something up here that you want to do once you have flagged a payer. And so in our case, we're going to want to bill. We're going to want to invoice. So when you flag a payer, my function that I would choose now is the envelope. Let's produce an invoice. If you like your shortcut keys on your keyboard, that would be an F11 key as well as a shortcut, but you can just click that little icon as well. Okay, so we want to produce invoices, produce that file. This screen always comes up whenever you're billing or invoicing something. And you'll see in a second, it gives you the same options if you're billing a patient, if you're billing one type of insurance as opposed to another. So this screen is asking us for some choices. It's saying, okay, first of all, let's talk about what dates of service you would like to bill. My first option that is ticked right now is saying, let's just bill everything that there is to bill. We don't really care about the date of service. We just care if it's ready to go, let's bill it. Whereas if it was month end or you're trying to bill for certain days in the system, not for everything, you might say something like, nope, I only want to bill for the stuff that happened last month or is dated last month, or I only want to bill for the stuff between a date range that I want to enter. Okay. The next section is asking what date should we say this is being billed as of? What date should we put on the invoice? It will always assume today's date, the current date, but you may decide you're going to backdate it. So an example might be if you're trying to do month-end billing and it's March the 6th and you're trying to deal with just February stuff, you might decide, okay, the date I'm going to bill between is February 1st to the 28th, and I'm going to backdate my invoice to February 28th, even though it's March the 6th. Okay, so those are your first choices to get started with. And then if you have multiple locations for your facility, you can bill them all at the same time if you choose all locations, or you can just pick and choose location by location. Okay, and then okay to move forward. So if the system finds something, this is the screen you'll typically get. And this option on the left-hand side is saying for me, prepare the file. And that must mean I'm preparing some kind of electronic file that I'm going to send to that payer. Otherwise, it would say print the file or print the invoice. Okay. So typically, before you actually prepare that file, you oftentimes want to have a look at it. You want to have another preview and just see if anything is showing up on that file that's maybe of concern. So that's our preview option. And when we send an electronic type of file, whether it's a HCFA e-claim or an EDI, you're going to get this screen, which is called a submission report. And they look slightly different, but they're telling you the same type of information. They're like, oh, okay, this is a list of all the services right now that meet that criteria that we're going to be billing for. So it's going to show you the patient name. It's going to show you service codes. It's going to show you units, service location modifiers. All that part shouldn't be a surprise to you in theory because you've already checked it on the revenue report. The new part that really sets this apart from the revenue report is this section here for comments. So comments are usually bad, I'll say. Comments are usually something that you need to bill that payer or something you need to send that clearinghouse that the system can't really find or it's not satisfied with the entry that you have. So I'm using a fake patient here, so I have lots of comments, but my comments are saying things like, your patient is missing an address, they're going to need that. They're missing their diagnostic code, they're missing this, they're missing that. Those are simple things that you can go back and find and fix in their profile. So the message does depend, obviously, on what that message is saying as to where you go to fix it. But 9 times out of 10, it's something to do with their profile, name, address, phone number, birth date, policy, claim number, that kind of thing. Or it's something to do with their charge. Their charge itself is missing something like a diagnostic code. Okay, so typically we would say we don't stop you from sending this file, even if you want to create it and send it with all these comments. We're just saying it's almost a guarantee you're going to get a rejection on this claim because you're going to need all those things. But if you're okay with whatever the message says and you want to send it anyway, you certainly can do that. Okay, so I'm going to close this. I'm going to cancel out of here. So that particular message was saying your client is missing a whole bunch of information in their address and their phone number area. So to fix that part, you would go back to the client list. You would probably find that client on your list, double click to get into their profile, and then just try to figure out what's missing and where to go fix that. And if you need help, contact support for sure, but usually you can find it somewhere in the profile. So name, address, phone number, policy claim number, that's probably easy stuff. When it starts saying things like the policy holder is missing their birth date, sometimes it depends on who the policy holder is. So if the client is the policy holder, it probably comes from their profile. But if we're going to say it's the spouse or someone else on the list that's their policy holder, this area here is where we contain their gender, birth date, relationship. So just keep that in mind. But if you need help, obviously trying to figure out where that message or what that message is trying to tell you to fix, certainly we can help you do that at support. Okay, but the gist of this is if you have comments, you probably want to go back and fix them before you actually prepare that file. Okay, so let's do that one more time. So payers, find your payer, identify it with a flag or flag a bunch of them. The next step now is let's invoice those payers. Let's choose our dates, choose our locations, choose the date potentially that we want to put on the invoice. Let's preview the file, and we just keep doing that until our comments go away or until we're okay with them. And then at some point, you would say, let's prepare that file. Let's make that file. And I'm going to cancel for a second. So where the file is located, and this will be the same for a HCFA electronic or an EDI, it's back to those settings. And you can modify under EDI invoice settings or HCFA settings where you save that file to. So in my case, I just made a folder on my desktop that I access, but you can just modify it and point to another folder where you prefer all those things to save to. Okay. And so behind the scenes, I've created a file for myself earlier. And this is what the file will look like. It's a text file. And I'm just going to open it on the screen so that everybody can kind of see what it looks like. So that is the mumbo jumbo of EDI world. That's what an EDI file looks like for one patient. I think there's like 2 charges part of that. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense unless you're trained to look at this. But amongst all that, if you look real hard, you can actually see there's little things in there that are including all the detail, like the name of the patient, the name of the insurance company, the phone number. It's all embedded in all that squiggle-miggle. But that is the benefit of an EDI file. There's no boxes anymore. There's no limitations to 8 services on a claim or something like that. It's just one big long line of text, but that's what it looks like. Okay. All right, so that's how we actually get to bill an EDI file. Another type of file, I'm going to play around with my payer here. And this type of file, I believe I've chosen as, let's actually check it. Yep, my 1500 red form. So now we want to pretend like we want to fill it out on a paper HCFA form. Now, my settings, always back to those settings, does have some options for HCFA e-bill or HCFA paper. And one of those settings is really, how do you want to look at your preview? Do you want to look at your preview like it's the HCFA claim form, or do you want to look at your HCFA like it's a data review, like what we just looked at, where we're giving you comments of things we think you might want to go back and double check? So it all depends on how you like to look at that. So I'm going to change my preview right now to the actual form itself. And I'm going to go through the steps again on that payer. So we're going to flag or identify our payer. That's the first step we flagged. The next step is pick a function we want to bill. We want to invoice that payer. Choose our dates. Choose our locations. Okay. And you'll notice, I'm just going to highlight this. My option on the left here does not say we're going to prepare the file, right? There's nothing electronic that we're preparing. So my option is to print that HCFA claim form or print onto a HCFA claim form. Okay, so I just wanted to point out that that'll change. So I'm going to choose preview right now. And what we should see happen on the screen is an actual HCFA claim form appear. So just to be clear, our system does not actually print the HCFA claim form itself, the red font with all the boxes. It'll print the text that you see onto a HCFA claim form that you put in the printer. Okay, it's just showing you what it's going to look like if you actually decide to print this out. So this particular view, we're not really giving you suggestions here of things we think are missing. We're not saying your patient is missing their address, missing their phone number, birth date. We're just showing it to you on the form, and then you can have a look at it and see if you want to change something. Okay, so that's called the actual form preview. Okay, and then you would print all these out, and that would call them billed in the system. Okay, so that's the action of billing, really. It's really consistent. You flag, and then you go to invoice. And what you end up with is either an electronic file of some sort or a paper file, just depending on how you've actually set up that payer. All those services that I'm talking about right now are called unbilled until we bill them. And so let's have a look and see what that looks like here. So I am in activities by service, the little book of hand, just like a patient has the little book of hand, the place that you go to look up all the history or what's been entered on that patient. And I'm just here because I just want to point out what the language is in our system. So charging a patient or charges is the little white hand. Everybody, in theory, gets a charge. As soon as they walk in the door and show up for service, we charge them for something. We don't call items billed until they're invoiced. So invoicing and billing is exactly the same thing. Until they actually show up as a billed item, an invoiced item, we reference that as unbilled, uninvoiced. And then, of course, unless things are marked as paid, they're unpaid and they're due. So we have a report that you can run at any time in the report section under the financial section, and it's called just that. It's called your unbilled services. So sometimes people like to run that report before they bill. They're like, all right, let's see what we have in our system to bill. Do we like what it looks like? I would suggest if you're going to do that, that's awesome. Also, run that report after you think you just billed. So if we think we just billed all of our payers right now, we would probably want to run this unbilled services report. We would say, all right, as of right now, show me clients, show me payers, show me both clients and payers for this location. And if my Medicare patient shows up, we would be like, that's weird. I thought I just billed my Medicare patient. So meaning nobody should really be a surprise for you on this list. These should be people that you've either held back in billing or you've held on to their billing for whatever reason. You're aware that they're on the unbilled services report. Okay, and I'm going to cancel that. So I did just mention holding back a patient for billing. Some of you may be wondering, well, how do I do that? How do I not grab that patient's name when I want to bill something? So there's a couple of different options. I'm just back on my payer listing right now, and I'm going to play around with 21st Century here. So on that payer, I can go to activities by service before I decide to bill. Instead of flagging the whole payer and saying, let's bill, I could actually go into the patients in activities by service and only flag the patients that I want to bill. I could say, well, bill this guy, but don't bill this guy. Don't flag this guy. So that's one option. That only really works well if you're dealing with one payer and you want to pick and choose the patients of that payer before you bill. Another option is actually to change something on the client setup. So I'm just going to go onto my client listing here to Mr. Test Full Coverage Medicare. I'm going to do a double click or an enter to get into their profile. And in the incident tab, there is a little area here to hold on to billing. And it's actually this little guy here. So everybody is set by default as invoice as normal. And that just means I'll tell you when I'm ready to bill this guy, I'll flag my payers, I'll flag my services, and tell you when I'm ready to invoice. You can actually change that to do not invoice. And do not invoice kind of holds all the third-party billing until you change it back to invoice as normal. So it won't affect the client portion or what you're billing the patient directly. It only affects the third-party portion when you say don't invoice. Okay, so that's an option there in case you're wondering. All right, so that's billing of our payer. So let's talk about billing of a client then. It's exactly the same steps. It's all about where you start. So for now, I'm under all of my active patients. And I could start exactly the same way. I could flag a bunch of patients in here if I want to manually decide who I'm ready to bill for right now. I could use my 2 red flags and say only flag my cash paying clients. I just want to bill them right now. That's another option. Or you could just flag everybody in the list. Okay, so I don't know who I have billing for in here, so I'm going to flag a couple of these guys. So flagging is always the first step. And then once you flag something, the next step is always a function. What is it that we want to do with those 2 identified patients? We want to bill them, see if there's any billing, invoicing. It's the exact same screen we just looked at for payers. It's asking me what are the dates, what are the locations. And then my preview, which you always want to do usually before you start printing them out. My preview has changed a little bit. It's not a HCFA claim form I'm going to send a client. It's not an electronic file probably. So this is a generic type invoice. We call this a generic everyday standard patient type invoice. So this would be a list of all the services with all the dates, all the descriptions, who performed them, NPI numbers and everything, with the amounts that we're charging that haven't already been billed to this patient. These are the unbilled charges right now that we need to put on an invoice. Okay. And then you can start printing those. Now, if all my patients, I'm using fake patients, so if my patient that I chose had an email address, I could actually just post and email it to that patient directly instead. And if I'm doing this in payers, and I have a bunch of patients that are going on the same type of invoice to a payer and they have an email address, I could also email it to them instead of having to print it. Okay, but your options now are post printed, email it if that's an option, or post only to the screen. So only those 3 post options will commit to that transaction. A cancel right now didn't do anything, didn't move it, didn't bill it. Okay. So I just want to point out, let's go to Mr. Self-Pay here, and we'll go to his activities by service, the little book with the hand. So I just want to point out The unbilled services appear with nothing, no entry in the billed column. Same with the unpaid items, right? And there's always reports that you can run for that, usually under your financial section. So you have an unbilled services, you have an unpaid services, and that's everything unpaid, whether you've billed it or not. The accounts receivables by invoice report, that's a list of invoices out there that haven't been paid yet. So accounts receivable by invoice is actually just tracking the invoiced items and aging those into 30, 60, 90, whatever, based on the date of the invoice. Okay, so we often get calls, what's the difference? I don't understand the difference between unpaid versus accounts receivable by invoice. So really the big difference is unpaid is everything. Anything you've charged, anything in the system at all, it doesn't care whether you've billed it, not billed it. As long as it's unpaid, it'll show up. So that report tends to be bigger than your accounts receivable. Accounts receivable is the stuff we think you're probably trying to collect on because you've issued an invoice to it, and we're aging that invoice. Okay. And again, when you're running reports under financial section for unbilled services, you can start to filter. If you're only interested in looking at your third party things that haven't been billed yet, you can filter and say, just show me the payer stuff, just show me the client stuff, show me both client and payer. You can start to filter that kind of stuff. You can actually do it by a provider, you can do it by a payer, you can do it by location, lots of different ways that you can filter those types of reports. Okay, so that's billing. So let's talk now about hopefully the next thing that starts to happen, and that's the payment, right? Hopefully, as soon as we start billing and invoicing all these things out, we start getting a payment back. So payments can come in a couple of different ways. So let's look at the most simplest of ways, and I'm going to use the scheduler for my demonstration here, because when you're in the scheduler and you're on a patient and maybe you've charged them for a service and you go to choose the payment icon, which I'm going to highlight here for you. So it looks like a little pile of money. When you choose to use that icon from the scheduler, this is called a nice little easy quick payment entry screen. And it basically gives you a few details to fill out: who's paying, what's the amount, what's the method of payment, right? How much did they pay? Do you want to produce an invoice or receipt? That kind of stuff. This is most commonly what the front desk team is dealing with when they're taking a payment after charging somebody probably for a copay or something. So this particular screen, why I'm focusing on this screen is because I just want to talk about the functionality of the screen. If I decide to say right now that my patient is going to pay me more than what they owe me, the system will make some assumptions from this quick payment screen. It'll assume if I'm going to pay or overpay what they owe me, then take this extra money and either don't apply it to anything, that's a little tick box here, don't attach it to any date of service, or it's probably going to take this money and pay off any older services that they have first. So if this patient owed me at the top of the screen here $60, it's going to want to take 60 of this 3,000 and go pay that off first or anything else. Okay, so if you want to be very detailed about where you place the payment, what dates of service, what invoices, you want to be very specific, you want to go beyond the scheduler. You want to probably go to the client's history screen. And I'll just focus these two guys here. So activities by service, the little book of hands, or activities by invoice, the list of all the invoices you've sent them. Two very good screens to go to. That's going to show you lots of good detail. There's no wrong or right answer there. I like activities by service because I can see everything, all the stuff that's billed, all the stuff that's unbilled, all the stuff that's paid. I can just see everything that's happened on the file. But whatever your preview choice is, that's completely fine. The purpose here is try to find something on the screen that you want to be specific about paying. So in my example, I'm going to pretend that my patient would like to pay for a few of their copays, but not all their copays. They want to be specific. So I would start flagging my items first, whether these were invoices or just services. I'm going to choose which ones I want to pay. So I might say, okay, I'm going to pay this one, I'm going to pay this one, but I'm not going to pay the top one for whatever reason. So flagging first. Now, because we've flagged, of course, we always pick a function next. And my function now would probably be let's pay. Let's enter some payments. So this screen is now bigger. It gives me many more options now. And this is called the multi-payment screen. And you get this automatically on a payer when you're paying many patients, many services. And you get this automatically when you're paying a single patient, but a few services at the same time. And if it looks intimidating, just start at the top left and work your way down. Just start answering the fields on your way. It's asking for a date, a method, how did you receive your money, and then how much would you like to pay? So in my example, I'm going to pretend that they're not paying me the full amount. They're going to pay me whatever, $20 in cash. That total is important. That total eventually has to equal this apply total column. So that column is saying, where would you like to put that 20? Okay. So each line I decide one by one. Do I want the whole 20 to pay off the first line first, or what's happening here? So the patient might say, nope, I'm only giving you $10 for the first one and $10 for the second one for whatever reason. And that's going to leave me a balance on those two lines of copay. And I might decide I'm going to write off the rest, or I'm going to decide, nope, I'm going to leave that there. And the patient has an agreement and they're going to come back in and pay that later. So the purpose of my instruction here is to point out that whatever the total is that I'm applying, I pick and choose where I want it to apply to. And if that leaves me a balance, I can decide whether I write it off, whether I move it on to the patient or, onto their next payer, or leave it where it is. Okay, so that's entering a payment for one patient, but they might be paying many services, many invoices all at the same time. Okay. So let's get out of there for a second. And now let's try and see what that looks like on a payer. It's exactly the same steps. And this is a manual payment, by the way. This is not when you get the electronic file that comes in from the clearinghouse. This is how you enter a manual payment. So let's go to, I'm going to go to Mr. Medicare here. So first thing I'm going to do is flag the name of the payer that I want to enter the payment on, right? We always flag first. After the flagging, we always pick a function. Now, my function, from what I see across the top of the screen, I personally might go to activities by invoice. That's a list of all the invoices I've already sent them, right? That's the only thing they're going to be paying me for, is something in here. And of course, I only have one thing, so let me do that again. So I'm going to go to payers. I'm going to cheat and go to activities by service. Oh, I've only got one thing in there too. Sorry. Let me try one more payer and see if I can pull up some more stuff here. All right, so I would flag my invoices that I want to make my payment on first, right? There might be hundreds of invoices. There might be 50 invoices. Your EOB might say, here's $10,000, and it's going to pay invoice number 151020. So I would flag invoice number 151020 here. And then now that I've flagged again, my next choice is a function. I want to pay for those services. So now I have lots of good detail on my screen. So again, just break it down from the top left. What's the date? What's the method that you want to say you received? And how much did you get paid? It's probably, unfortunately, not what you billed, right? So you might have a check number, an EFT reference number, and you might decide, all right, if in the event I have to get rid of the balance between what I billed and what they paid and what the patient isn't responsible for, you can decide what you want to call that adjustment. Do you want to call it a write-off, an adjustment, a contractual write-off? You can decide in your payment and adjustment methods. So again, my focus is this $1,000 I'm saying I got paid, right? I'm going to follow the EOB probably and make it match. I billed 40, they paid me 20. They billed me this, I billed this, they paid me this. I billed this, they paid this. And that's going to go all the way down line by line by line by line until I get to $1,000. So each of those lines, again, just like my patient, sometimes has a balance that's left over if they're not paying the full amount I billed. And you have to decide, what are you going to do with the balance? That's the big part that changes based on your clinic and based on what you've already done or handled for a copay or a co-insurance or a deductible or something. If you have already charged your patient for their copay, maybe you've even taken their money, maybe you've given them a receipt, then it's unlikely right now you're going to transfer the balance back to the patient and bill them again. Okay, if you've collected money and that's it, you've collected a credit from your patient, you might be transferring this balance to the patient so that you can take the credits you've collected for the last couple of weeks and apply it towards these services. Okay, if you've already handled your copay separately, you might decide that's a write-off for me. I've already dealt with the whole $20 charging thing and collecting from my patient, so anything left over is just a write-off. Okay. Typically, you go line by line by line. But if you are lucky enough that everything is happening the same way, you're saying any balance that's left over is going to be a write-off, we have shortcut buttons at the bottom for you. We can say, okay, well, anything left over, just automatically write off the balance. If I'm transferring anything to the patient, just do that all the way down for all my entries on the screen instead of having to do it line by line. Okay. So at the end of the day, that's how you're posting a payment manually for a payer, and you go patient by patient. Now, the other form of a payment, hopefully that most people get, is called an ERA. It's called a remittance file. It's also called an 835 file. It's a file that you can usually download or ask from your clearinghouse, and it's basically an electronic payment file. It's a file that's going to post all the payments as it was told to post. So just like you looked at the manual posting, it would do all those things. Okay, so if you have an ERA, an 835 file on your screen or somewhere you can download from your clearinghouse, when you're ready to process that file, it's called an action in our system. And it's importing that remittance file, that EDI, that 835. And you would use the little yellow file folder here to find that file on your computer, wherever you've downloaded it to. And then it's going to ask you for a specific date to run that file. What date do you want to say this is processing? And then when you say process, on your screen, you're going to see what's happening right now. It's processing that file. It's actually looking for all those patients, looking for all those charges, and it's trying to process that file against their name. So I will say this is awesome. It does probably 90% of the work for you. But as you can see, you kind of lose a little bit of control because it's just doing what it was told to do. So if that EOB comes in and it says, you billed me 100, I paid you 80, go get 20 from your patient, that's exactly what it's going to do. And you would either have to go back and fix the 20, reverse the 20, decide later that that's not what you wanted to do, but that's what you would kind of lose control over. You would have to go back and fix whatever later. But again, it does 90% of the work for you. Okay, now I can't do a preview because that's going to have some real patient names on there. So this is what it's going to print out for you after that processes. This is called a remittance report. And the report itself can have maybe 2 or 3 different sections. And mine is all fake patients, I apologize, so nothing actually got posted here. But on that report, it usually shows you a section called Identified Remittances. And that means we have found a match. We found this date, we found this patient, we found this date of service, and we posted it. And here's what we posted. Sometimes there's another section called unidentified or unknown, and that's exactly what you're seeing on my screen. That whole payment was basically unknown. I can't find any of my patients, any of my services. So that's giving me a list basically of the stuff I'd have to go post manually because it couldn't find it in the system. And then another section sometimes comes up as duplicates. If it's already posted this payment, or maybe the secondary got billed and it's trying to send a payment in and it looks like the primary paid and the secondary paid, it would come up as a duplicate. So there's a couple of different sections that can show up on this report telling you exactly what got posted and what didn't get posted and why. Okay, and then at the end of this report, it kind of looks like this. It gives you some reason codes. So if it's saying an unidentified item or we didn't post this because of 197, then it kind of explains what all those different codes mean. Okay, and there's lots of fancy stuff that we can do sometimes behind the screen. Things like if you see a pattern on your remittance file, and every time it says, go get the money from your patient for a copay, you would actually prefer it doesn't do that. We can sometimes go into the file and figure out what that little code is. We can figure out, okay, code number 123 is what makes the money move on to the patient for their copay, and we can tell the system, don't do that anymore, just ignore that. So not to get into this too much, but in housekeeping, under the financial section, there's a couple of cool little EDI 835 options in there. And sometimes we can tell the system to do stuff like this. Find this code and don't pay it. Don't do anything with it, or do something else. Record it as cash, record it as Visa, MasterCard. So you don't need to worry about this too much. You're probably going to call support if you have that specific question, because they're going to want to look at your EDI, your remittance report, and actually help you figure out what to do here. But I'm just pointing out there are options for us in the housekeeping area for that. Okay, so that's the big bulk of billing. It's the billing a payer, billing several payers at the same time, getting electronic files, sending them to the clearinghouse, making sure all the entries are right before we bill, billing patients, collecting money from patients, collecting money from payers. So the last thing I just want to point out before I open this up for some question answers here is, again, the language that we tend to use in the system for a couple of different things. So I'm going to use my Medicare patient. Okay, so I have my fake Medicare patient highlighted here on the screen. I'm going to go into their activities by service and just point out again on the right-hand side, right? Charging is the little white hand over here on the left. That's the only way you get a charge. Billing is only completed by invoicing. You must bill in the system. That's really important. You must invoice in the system. And then paying, of course, is if anything gets marked as a payment. So in addition to that, we have items called statements. And why I like to point that out is because the language of a statement versus an invoice is usually not two different things, but in our system it is. So statements are these two little icons over here on the left-hand side. There's two different versions of a statement, the blue one and the pink one, I'll call it. And you'll see that little icon lots of different places in the system. So if I go to the list of all your clients, it's going to be there as well, up here at the top. If you go to a single patient, it's going to be there. If you flag a bunch of patients, you get your options to run statements as well. And that's oftentimes what you're doing. Sometimes you're doing a combination of invoicing and you want to run statements. So an example might be, I'm going to use the pink statement just to show you. I'll show you both so you can see the difference. But invoicing, remember, grabs the current charges that haven't already been invoiced and invoices them. A statement is more like a report of things that have already happened in the past. It doesn't care if things are billed or unbilled or that are paid or not paid. It's going to give us a list of things that have happened. So sometimes what we want to do is we want to bill out, invoice out the current charges, and then for collections, maybe we want to focus on people that have a balance that's over 30 days. So in my example here, I'm just going to say for this date range, I just want to run statements for anyone that's got a balance between 30 and 60 days, meaning omit everybody else. That's all I want to focus on right now. And I'm going to do a preview. Hopefully something comes up. And this is what a client statement looks like. It's client by client, and then it's a list of all the services, but it's also showing me transactions like your insurance has paid this portion, you paid this portion, this person got transferred from you, we've adjusted this amount. It's kind of showing the whole progression. And then it also ages. Okay, so that's a statement option. And I'm going to do the same thing with the blue file folder, the blue statement. I'm going to run a statement now for the same date range. I'm not going to worry about time. And I'm going to preview. So that statement, you'll notice, looks more like one of our invoices. It's not showing me on a patient what their insurance has paid or not paid or been involved with. It's kind of separating it. It's like, patient, this is your list of transactions, payments, services, and then an insurance company would be a separate statement instead of it combined. Okay. All right. Now, behind the scenes, let's see if I actually have it on my screen here. So I don't, but in our learning center area, which is this website that I have up on the screen here, there is actually a little video here on how to process an ERA. It's about 7 minutes. I just breezed through it today really quickly. I believe I have it up in the background here. So if you do want to watch a little video, we do have that on our learning center. You can also call support. They can run it with you. That's another option as well. So remember, how you get to our training videos, or if you need any assistance, go to help and then about, and then the link for the university or learning center is there, and then the email for the support department is there as well. Okay. So that's it, guys. That's everything on my checklist to make sure that I show you today for kind of an intro for billing. There's lots of little complicated things certainly that can happen from that point and beyond. And we may even decide, if you guys have input or something, we may even decide to do an advanced billing webinar if that's something you're interested in, or actually running or creating an EDI 835 file and looking at it a little bit deeper. Those are other options as well. But for now, there is a little chat box hopefully up on your screen. So if you do have any questions at all that you would like to bring up, feel free to chat your message in there. If you don't want to reach out verbally on the phone, you can unmute yourself right now if you have any questions. You can always shoot me an email on the side as well if you have any issues. And I'll just point out on your screen, I'll circle it again, the same email address there that you would reach out to for support, just replace the first little part of that. So instead of support@practiceperfectemr.com, just put Heather at blah, 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 and then it will come to me directly. Okay. So that's it, guys. Thanks so much for attending. These webinar series are, this is probably the last one. Next week, I think, is the last one. It's a Canadian one next week. And then they're going to take a break for the summer and they'll start back up in the fall. But if you do have any suggestions on topics or maybe questions or something that you would like to see addressed in a webinar, just let us know and we'll make sure that we do one of those. Okay. All right. Okay, guys, thanks so much. I'm going to leave the screen up for a little bit just in case anyone does have any specific questions for me. Perfect. Oh, I am getting a few questions actually coming in. So one of my questions is, how do I find the invoice submission report? Okay, so it depends on where that invoice submission report is being saved. So there's actually a couple of different ways. Sometimes you need support's help to figure out where it actually is on your computer, but I'm going to show you a couple of tricks you can do for that. So let's pretend you just created a submission report for Medicare and you lost it. Whoops, it didn't print out of the printer. Whoops, where did it go? So one easy way to do that is just to reprint it or tell the system to reproduce it. So one of the things you can do, it's under the action area, and you can do that actually a couple of different ways. You can go to Medicare and just actions reproduce the invoices. So you have to start the same way. If I didn't explain that properly, you have to flag whatever payers, all your EDI payers, whatever you're trying to recreate. And then under actions, it'll say, I want to reproduce the invoice. And that wording I can see is a little bit confusing. You're actually reproducing whatever it was that you created in the first place. So it would recreate the submission report, it would recreate the EDI, whatever you're looking for. And then you fill out the dates, fill out the locations, fill out the whatever, and then you can say okay, and then you can do a preview and get that report back again on your screen. That's probably the easiest way. And that is very helpful if you actually know something about what you're trying to recreate. Do you know the names of payers? Do you know the date? Do you know the date range? That kind of thing. Okay. If you're actually trying to get to the EDI file itself, that part sometimes you need help from support. It all depends on what your setting is and where you've chosen those files to be saved to. So in my computer, they're just saving all on my desktop, so I can find my way back to that folder, and then I can easily get my EDI file from there. But support may need to be involved to kind of help you get back to that specific area. Okay. I'm getting another question too. This is more of an advanced item about recoups and how to apply recoups, and I think that means like chargebacks and tag for resubmission. I'm assuming what that's asking for. So that definitely is a little bit more advanced, and sometimes you need support to get involved because of whatever the situation, it might be very specific. So I'm going to show you something right now, but this is not necessarily what you're going to do because it all depends on the actual situation and how things happen. So in my scenario, I'm going to pretend that we sent a whole file out to Medicare and one little thing on my file is incorrect. One little thing got rejected because it needed a modifier, but I want everything else to stay as is. So one way that you might quickly do that is find your patient, go to the services, activities by service, and this next part is important. You have to find the service that actually went to the payer. So sometimes you're splitting your charge between the patient and the payer. It only works if you can find the line that went to the payer. And on that line, when you right click, you can get a tag for resubmission. So I'll just tag something incorrectly so you can see the difference. So if I flag this top line and I try to right click, see how there's no tag for resubmission? So it's very specific. It only works on the line that went to the insurance company, and a tag for resubmission would unbill, uninvoice that one little line so that you could fix it, edit it, and it would go back out on your next bill run with a tag for resubmission on it. So I'm not sure if I answered your question appropriately, if that's what you were actually asking me, but that is what a tag for resubmission is. I probably wouldn't suggest you do that on your own necessarily unless your example meets my exact scenario I just walked you through. Otherwise, I would suggest maybe just call support, explain what your issue is, and then they'll walk you through because there's maybe 3 or 4 different things you could actually do. Okay. Any other questions? I'll leave this up on the screen in case anyone has another question they want to pose. That would be awesome. And if not, you can all disconnect from the session. And thanks so much for attending, guys. Hopefully you found this a little helpful. Take care, everyone.